So Meg, I would like to start with you. You have a unique perspective, having worked both on the local level, but you've seen it all the way at the federal level. Policies, how they interact between the federal and the local level. So first, I would like for you just to share from your heart, how did God bring you into this line of work?
It's truly amazing to think about for me, very, very humbling. And I'll say that the better look I've gotten, the less I've liked what I've seen, I'm afraid, sorry to say. In 2015, before the Obama guidelines came down, as I said yesterday, our school board in Fairfax County decided to add sexual orientation and gender identity to the non-discrimination policy at our school, which then opened the gateway for just all kinds of problems and conflicts related to that addition. Aside from the fact that it is completely just against God's design for the human person. So I got involved with a parents group that was going to school board meetings and expressing our very diverse community's opposition to this move. And then I also got involved with a parents group that was reviewing the 25-year update of our sex education curriculum. So we were being assaulted on all fronts, and it was really just such a blessing and so humbling to meet so many wonderful people in that work. And one of the people I met was Kathy Roos from Family Research Council, because Family Research Council and the Virginia Family Foundation were the ones who, that early in the game, understood what was happening, because they knew that we were in a spiritual fight, that this is a spiritual war for the souls of our children. And it's a group like Family Research Council who understands that fundamentally. And so we are always on the forefront of these battles, I have come to learn. So I met Kathy Roos, and they needed a project done, which was an analysis of the Southern Poverty Law Center's a curriculum for public schools called Teaching Tolerance. So I spent a year reading that curriculum, examining all of the contents, and people like to talk about the 1619 project, because that's a more recent offering, but let me tell you, everything the 1619 Project hopes it will be, the Southern Poverty Law Center's Teaching Tolerance curriculum has been for 30 years. It is completely entrenched in our school systems, and they love to target especially red states. So as a result of that work and the friends that I had made in my DC suburban county of Fairfax, I had the opportunity to go into the Trump administration at the Department of Education, and having never served in government before, it was just an amazing experience. I learned a tremendous amount every day. I tried to learn something about personnel, policy, or procedure. Didn't leave my office until those 3 boxes were checked every day. And there, as it turns out, there had been some really wonderful work done at the Department of Education to try to roll back the Obama policies and to advance religious liberty in schools. So now I'm back at FRC, very happy to be with my people at FRC.
And it's great to have you back. Thank you. So Amy, I want to kind of ask you the same question on those lines. What brought you into this whole arena of working in public education and running for the school board?
Sure. Well, my husband and I have been married for 32 years, and we have 3 children and 1 grandchild, and the age gap with those span about 25 years that I've seen education shift from the priority that it should be of educating our children to the indoctrination of our children. So I was already interested. I had served everything from doing PTO to room volunteer to being a substitute. But when COVID hit, we saw parents being disregarded, kids being made to stay home. When they sent out a survey at our school district, for instance, and they asked the parents if they wanted their children to return to school in the fall of 2020. Over 80% wanted their kids back in school. But when that went to the school board, that was disregarded. They listened to the teacher unions and to the teachers and other influences, and some didn't want them to go back at all. Some wanted them to go back 2 days a week. We settled for 4, or the board settled for 4, not me. And, but it wasn't enough. The kids were still suffering, and the fact that they just totally disregarded the parents made me want to run. And between the masking, the introduction of CRT policies, the sexual orientation, the gender ideology, the political ideology, all of that being brought into the classroom, I decided it was time to do more than just being involved by volunteering. So I decided to run for school board. And I also had 2 other conservatives that were interested in running. We had 1 conservative that was already on the school board. It's a red state. Our county is a red county. Went 15 points for Trump, but the school board is blue. You have to be active and change those school boards. So we ran, even though it's a nonpartisan race, we ran on our values. We ran as conservatives, and we won. And we have now changed that. We now have a majority, and we're putting in policies to change that. And you can do it.
Thank you. And Martin, as I mentioned, I know you spent 2 decades in public education. Share a little bit about your story that kind of led you to your decision to get involved in and go to work for the Indiana Family Institute.
Sure. I know you guys have heard a lot of famous people up here the last couple days, but just to prove to everyone that if we can do it, you can do it. This is the Everyman Normal People panel, right? I hold the distinct honor of being the only presenter this entire week who didn't even have a headshot for the program. So you can check your program. I sent in a yearbook photo. You'll recognize the Olin Mills backdrop because 6 months ago, I was still wrapping up my 19th year of teaching. And so if we can do it, you can do it, right? But I did feel, JP, that God was leading me out of teaching, and shortly after resigning, I met Ryan McCann. He's our executive director for Indiana Family Institute. And with help from Alliance Defending Freedom, he wanted to try a new idea to bring somebody on that had a public education background that could develop parent groups around the state that would mobilize against some of the problems that we've been seeing. And here in the short term, we're really attempting to focus on recruiting, educating, and supporting solid school board candidates. We want them to know their legal rights. We want to connect them with lawyers who are going to support outstanding policies like you'll hear from that Amy was able to pass. So,
All right, well, thank you. Thank you for jumping in there. So Meg, coming back to you, we've seen the headlines. The media, they'll focus on the drop in test scores, or 1.3 million kids have been pulled out of schools just since the pandemic began. So we see these kind of numbers, and then of course we've heard a lot of the issues already this weekend that parents are deeply concerned about. But from your experience, is there a challenge that is facing the public education system? What would you say is maybe the biggest challenge facing the public education system that those watching, those here in our audience, can do something about and make an impact?
Well, from the federal level, what you see is a almost complete co-option by the ideological left of any organization that is lobbying or impacting public schools. And you know, they have that situation in North Korea. When you have only one side of information that's being promulgated in a system, you're going to have a lopsided outcome. And so from the federal level, you see now in this administration, they're queer theory radicals running the Department of Education now. They believe that there is no truth. Their worldview is not our worldview, and our worldview is desperately needed in the educational space. So in addition to the march through the institutions that has ruined our university system, and turns out teachers who are out of that system now into they're teaching in public schools who don't share our worldview. We have lobbying organizations and interest groups who profit off the public education system and use our money, our tax money, to indoctrinate our children. So, for example, at the Office of Civil Rights, that's the office that promulgated the Title IX rule. Now, that's gotten a lot of attention, obviously the men on the sports teams, and that's very easy to see. What's not as easy to see is another thing that the Office of Civil Rights does, which is they politicize school disciplinary procedures. So they make it a hate crime to discipline a student for misbehavior if that student happens to have a particular skin color or ethnic identity. Now, this is ultimately at its heart an attack on order. It's an attack on discipline. It's an attack on the ability to judge simple right from wrong, social versus antisocial behavior, right? And we know that our children need order to learn. They have a right to be safe in their schools. And the Department of Education now in the Biden administration is undermining that from the federal level with investigations into school systems. They're accused of being racist in their policies when what they're actually doing is simply enforcing discipline in the school. So there are so many things that the public is just generally not aware of because of the left side, the lopsided influence of the left on the educational system. So it's so great when you have people it's supposed to be a locally controlled system, right? Schools are under local control. So when you get people involved at the local level, they can push back on some of these policies at the school board and the state level.
Right. Well, that's right. A lot of the policies are being driven on this local level, but of course, as you mentioned, we can see how the federal government and federal agencies are trying to coerce their way and push this on them. And so
they can only do it by harassing, right?
Right.
Because what they're doing isn't right and isn't true, right? Their actions are based on a worldview that ultimately is wrong. So the only way they can enforce this is with their authoritarian practices, and the only response to that, of course, is to resist.
Right. And we saw that in the Obama administration when he unveiled his kind of Title IX type policies, and then of course we've seen it put on steroids in this Biden administration.
Right.
So, for certain. And so, Amy, you sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but if you could explain a little deeper as to what you've seen, perhaps anything from the impact from the federal level or any of the other challenges on the local level that you believe that that should be tackled first.
Sure. When I first came on, our very first meeting, the first thing we did was make masks optional. That was a mandate. And we also changed a policy in our district where there was overreach, where they were only providing paid COVID leave to teachers and staff if they received the COVID vaccination, which of course was unfair. So we changed that so all employees would be covered because students and the staff have the right to make their own health care decisions. So we changed that day one. And then we also had to address other issues, though. We had a social justice club. They called it a club, but it took place during school hours. It was had critical race theory books purchased with taxpayer funds. And this was taught during our school to teach our children to hate America. And so we put an end to that club. We also, I had a teacher, a brave teacher who came to me. I had heard inklings of what was going on with the gender, the social transitioning and keeping secrets from parents. But I had a teacher come forward and bring me an email that was actually sent out to the entire staff by a teacher, reminding them that teacher conferences were approaching and to make sure that we kept those preferred pronouns and gender social transitioning students, their secrets from their parents. That's not happening anymore at our district. That's also done. And there was a court case settled, Alliance Defending Freedom. Actually, they were involved in that, and there was a teacher in Kansas who did not want to be compelled to use those preferred pronouns and also to keep those secrets from the parents. And they won that case. So that kind of helped with us in that. And we just seen the different issues that were coming to the forefront, and we needed to tackle that. We needed to make our curriculum, be transparent, have our curriculum available to the parents, let them challenge books, have the library materials posted where they could search that and challenge books, because we know that we have inappropriate materials. We're not book banning, we're selecting appropriate criteria for our children. And so it's very important. We came across all those problems when we came in, and we'll we've addressed those, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, I think, on some policies that we put in forth at our school to do that. But if you don't think that these issues are happening in your school, maybe it's a conservative town, then you're wrong. I'm sorry to say, but you're wrong. And the more, since I've been on the school board and the further I've dug into this, parents need to speak up and find out what's going on before it's too late and we need to change this.
Right. I think that's so true. There is this assumption, well, that happens in California or the Northeast or these other places, but you've seen in Indiana, Martin, even there, that just how extensive some of this is as well. So if you kind of want to speak to some of that.
I mean, fortunately, personally, I worked for some great principals and had a lot of strong Christian men that were on our staff. And so it's important to remember from district to district it can change, but also from school to school with the different buildings, and then even from teacher to teacher. So it's just really important to get to know who's teaching your kids and who's teaching in your community. So it does get a little tricky there, but I feel like just as Amy mentioned, what we're seeing in Indiana, we're seeing all over the country, lack of transparency in curriculum and conversations that are being held with controversial topics in the classroom, a lack of respect for parental rights, obscene books, which you mentioned, not only in the classroom, or not only in the libraries, but also in the classroom, which is a little trickier to figure out. So it's so important for parents to be in the classroom, to be volunteering, to go to those meet the teacher nights, and to really be in touch with what's going on in their specific children's classrooms. But divisive and false narratives about U.S. history that Meg mentioned, political indoctrination, social engineering, gender confusion, restroom policies. And honestly, this has been brought up a lot the last couple of days, but some of our best and brightest leaders, especially Christian conservatives, just simply aren't considering even running for the school board, and they're just disengaged. You know, I think that often as Christians, we're so afraid to step into a political arena. Like Senator Langford said last night, you know, it feels dirty to us, and it feels like something that we don't want to be a part of. But it's time for the church to step up, and it's time, you know, for us to end this addiction that we have to comfort.
Right. Meg, I want to come to you actually kind of off of that. That's a perfect setup for that question. For those that are watching are thinking, well, maybe I should run for school board. Maybe it is time for me, or maybe I'm not going to run, but maybe I'm going to go recruit someone to run and help that person run, someone like Amy. And I'm sure you had those that came in behind you and helped run your campaign, and those are critical. But first, I'd like, Meg, for you to kind of speak to, I know FRC Action has had a school board candidate recruitment program and training program. If you might want to speak to that a little bit.
Right. We have at the website, frcaction.org/schools, our school board boot camp, which is just a general overview about the challenges our schools are facing, and you hear from people who've been on the school board and they tell you what it's like. We go over some issues, and then we talk about how to run a race, how do you run a campaign for school board, and then talk about, you know, really praying about running for school board, and if that's what you're called to do, we would like to support you in doing that. If that's not what you're called to do, there's still ways for you to be involved. I know that there was a big difference made for you by a group that came in and helped you in your campaign.
Yes.
That kind of thing is happening more and more on our side. We're seeing more and more engagement in local, state and local races and school board races in particular, and it's so important because the other side has a whole machine ready to fund and elect their candidates. Because remember, there is at least $800 billion a year spent in public education. That number will just go up every year. The county I live in, Fairfax County, has a yearly budget of $4 billion they spend every year. So it has always been a mystery to me why you wouldn't understand the return on investment of funding a candidate race for $1 million in that county, and funding a slate of candidates to win, to get to spend $12 billion over 4 years. A lot of money. So fortunately, that math is catching up with our side, and we're seeing more engagement. But Amy, why don't you talk about your race, because it was close.
It was close. It was very close. Of course, they said we were bringing politics into the classroom.
That's
I'm
us.
like, you've already done that for the last 25 years. We were very blessed. Brian Gerdusky with the 1776 Project Pact, for instance, if you don't necessarily want to run, you could give to some of these organizations. We were one of his first slates of conservatives that he had endorsed through his PAC, and they helped support us through that. And I believe now he said this fall they're supporting, I want to say it's over 200 candidates.
Yeah.
So this is a nationwide event where you can either donate, you could run, you can write your school board members, you can show up at meetings. But when I came on board, what we saw was those problems that I mentioned, right? So we needed a solution, and I was planning on tackling those one at a time. But then our Kansas legislature, they had introduced a Parents' Bill of Rights. Like, well, that's exactly what we need, that it tackles a lot of the issues we were having. And our legislature passed that Parents' Bill of Rights. But then our governor vetoed it. She said that passing the Parental Bill of Rights was the worst thing that could happen. And also some of the critics said that this should be handled at a local school board level. So that was like a light bulb to me. Well, okay, if you guys can't get it done, because we didn't have the veto-proof majority so to override her veto in Kansas. So I took that and I mirrored that Parents' Bill of Rights. I made some additions. One of those is for parents have the right that teachers cannot keep any secrets or information about their child from them, either willingly or unknowing from the parents. So that's listed in that. So I took that, mirrored that, took that to our school board, and we passed that. We passed that 4-3. So we did what the legislature couldn't get done and what the governor tried to stop. We did have opposition. We even had some teachers and staff in the crowd that actually had stickers on, with the circle with the line through, say no to Parents' Bill of Rights, which was quite shocking to me to see teachers out there with that. But we held strong, and you could do that. And this Parents' Bill of Rights, it guarantees that they can direct the health care of their child, direct their education. It keeps, you mentioned groups coming in. We had groups coming in to provide professional development training for staff that was race-based, divisive training. It's a money-making business for some of these activist groups. We can't have that anymore. It addresses the critical race theory. It addresses, keeps the curriculum. It has to be posted online. Transparency, parents can object to that. They can withdraw their children from an assignment if they deem that it goes against their religious values. Anything all the way to vaccinations, it addresses that, again, under the health care issue that they can decide on that, parents can. It guarantees them the right to speak at school board meetings, which even though I had some people speaking in opposition, they need to be able to be heard. And in Kansas, that's left up to the local school boards, but we made that part of our Parental Bill of Rights too. But we got it passed, and you can do it too. And anybody that says, we did it in Kansas, so trust me, if you just work hard on it, support your school board candidates. If you don't want to run, write your legislators. And just really be involved in what's going on with the education of your children. These are our children. Your rights don't stop when we drop them off at the school door.
That's right. Amy, I went and looked at that Parental Bill of Rights that was passed, and I read one of the lines in there that I'll read here. It says, parents have the right to be informed of and able to inspect the curriculum, instructional materials, and any other materials that are made available or taught to such child in the child's school.
Yeah.
And that created an uproar, which, as we were just talking a few minutes ago backstage, you said, well, that's actually always been the policy. The problem is the school district has not, I think, as you said, had not informed that. But for parents out there that aren't aware of this, right, or maybe they want to exercise it, how do they go about it without getting the runaround from the local school one of
one of the reasons why we passed that is because when parents would want to look at certain curriculum, there may just be an outline posted, but not the specifics of the assignments. And for instance, our Kansas State Board of Education said, we don't teach critical race theory in Kansas. It's not in our Kansas standards. Those are just guidelines. Those are not the specific lessons that are being taught in the classroom. And trust me, they can circumvent that and add that. So you need to be able to view those. So what we have now is all of that content has to be listed online, and the parents can go in and look at any of those. You may be told that because of licenses to the curriculum that they can't supply that. That's a popular excuse, but they can do that. You have a right, and that's why we added that in there. And if they don't, then something's wrong. Something's being hidden from you. Like some of the staff would say, well, this has always been the case, but it wasn't there. It wasn't on there. So you have to make sure that it's listed as a right, and as a parent, you can go and access any of that at any time. It's very easy for them to post all of these lessons and online. So if you don't already have that, I would advocate for that. Some parents are having to spend tons of money trying to FOIA information from their schools that they're already paying for by their tax dollars, and these are their children, and that's just, it shouldn't be happening. So this helps all of that be transparent to the parents, and you know exactly what's going on in their classroom.
That's right. Well, Martin, I want to come to you on this as to what you would recommend as far as some of the policies that you're encouraging in your role there at the Indiana Family Institute.
Yep.
As you talk with school board members and obviously some of these kind of policies that Amy's promoting, but kind of your thoughts
Well,
on
the first thing I'll do is something I told my students to never do. I'm going to copy some answers, right? They're right back here, right? So always start with prayer. You know, I think that we have to recognize two things in prayer. Number one, Meg mentioned, it shows that we recognize that we're in a spiritual battle. We're in a battle between good and evil, and call it evil, right? This goes beyond us. This goes beyond the physical realm. And the second thing prayer does, it reminds us that apart from God, that we can't do anything. Nothing of eternal worth happens without God informing us and helping us. And then the next thing is that we vote, and we have to start thinking about voting as being the first thing and the least that we can do, right? The big one is the stand part, and we've heard a lot about this the last few days, but putting action behind our convictions, as Senator Langford said last night, you know, we ask God, what's my part? What's my part, my role to play? And I think that's gonna look different for everyone. We each have unique gifts. Some, like Amy, are going to be called to run for school board, or as Meg mentioned, it's going to require a team of support. So maybe you're going to be called to support someone that you know would be a great school board candidate with your time, your talent, your treasure. Some are going to start a parent group. Some will work on PTOs. Some will just take the time to get to know teachers and support the good teachers that are still out there and the good administrators that are doing things correctly. Going to school board meetings. And honestly, I hope other family policy groups will try to emulate what we're pioneering in Indiana with really getting involved with school board elections. I'll tell you what we can't do, right? And Meg, you mentioned this a little too, is we can't just continue to concede massive institutions that we know, are corrupt and often controlled by leftist unions, because our local public school district, it affects everybody, whether it's parents, grandparents, taxpayers, homeowners, local businesses, but most importantly, children. And as Bishop Matthews reminded us last night here, the least of these are the children that we are called to protect. I do think we also have to understand it's okay to sometimes recognize that we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We can support school choice, we can support private schools, we can support homeschooling, while still recognizing that over 51 million American students, that's over 90%, are still in the public schools. The quote that's attributed to Lincoln is, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next." So I just encourage everyone, take what God has put in front of you. And a lot of times, I like it referred to this way, he only lights the next step in your path, right? And I know that was true for me, because 6 months ago, I had no idea that I would be doing this. And I experienced that this last spring. But just be obedient to act, to trust God with the results. I highly doubt that Amy had any idea that her actions in Kansas to pass righteous school board policies were going to be shared by me, 3 states east of you, with school board candidates in Indiana that need encouragement to stand for truth. And they just simply need to see someone that's done it and had success. and how encouraging that is to them. As good citizens, I think we have to take ownership of our local schools. You know, we do fund them still, right? We must steward them well. A few days ago, Allie Beth Stuckey was here, and one of her colleagues, Steve Dace, often says this: "I just didn't want to rock the boat," loses in every history book every time. "It's not my place to say anything," loses in every history book every time. "I just want to be left alone," loses in every history book every time. So we need to be people of action, and as Bishop Matthews said, we need to be the church.
That's right. That's right.
I think it's important, yes.
Ready.
I think it's important to remember that this is a system that loves to remind us that we should take our values and go to our Christian schools and go to our Catholic schools, that we don't belong in the public school system, and nothing is further from the truth. Our worldview, our spiritual energy that we bring, the light of Christ that our children bring into those schools is desperately, desperately needed there. It is really you cannot overstate that fact. And these are our tax dollars that are being spent. We cannot sacrifice the next generation of children in this country to a worldview and ideologies that will undo our nation, that attack our families. We need our children to be educated in a way that encourages them to form families, where they understand that a loving, committed marriage is like having a superpower. We know it's a supernatural power, right? I mean, we need to be encouraging and instilling in children the values that have made our country great, and that makes it a beacon of the world. The panel that was just here before, these people come to our nation to share in our dream. And we must make sure that it is preserved for the next generation. And we have to do that where most of the kids are. The reason the left is in the public schools is because that's where the kids are. And if we're not there, that's kind of on us. So the best defense is a good offense. Parents' Bill of Rights. Why don't we try to, we have all these devices in schools. Why don't we give parents ownership of the data that's created on those devices that are issued to children every day? Tell me why we can't do that. Advancing policies that you're going to be told are stupid, naive, you're going to be told you just don't understand how it works, you're not an education expert. You know what you are an expert on? You're an expert on your own child. You're an expert on truth. You're an expert on common sense. Yeah. And that is what is desperately needed in our public school system today.
That's right. And it also goes back to that conversation we heard earlier from George Barna, as far as the fact that we're delegating to the school, whatever school setting it might be. We're delegating the authority for them to teach our kids.
Right.
But the responsibility is with us to form their worldview. And as it says in Deuteronomy, talk about what God says on all these issues. And that we're the ones talking about it day in and day out, wherever we go. And so that's on us. It doesn't matter whether homeschooling or, because they're going to be exposed to a lot of this content just out in the world, and that's the reality of it. So this I'll just kind of open up for whoever wants to jump on it, but maybe just one tip or maybe piece of advice that you would have for someone who is listening to all this and they feel like God's moving on them to somehow get involved, and they're kind of thinking, okay, what next? Where should I start? Is there anything that you would like to throw out there?
Sure. A parent could be our children's best advocate. Like Meg mentioned, you don't need experience, you need common sense. And the public school system is severely lacking in that right now. So don't be afraid. You will be ridiculed, you will be attacked. Sorry to say, as soon as I announce my candidacy, you will be called names that you've never been called before. But the saying that if you're receiving flack, you're over the target. So you just need to stay strong and stand up for what is right. Pray about it. Ask others to pray for you. I have one voter that I met who now is a friend who will message me before every school board meeting and ask what she can pray for. So do what you can. You can run for school board, or you can support your school board. You can write your school board. You can show up and speak at your school board. Write your legislators. They need to enact a Parents' Bill of Rights in every state. Your school boards need to enact a Parents' Bill of Rights. It's sad that we need that, but it needs to be done. So write your legislators. You can testify at education hearings. You can pray for them. There's so many ways that you can support, but you need to lend that support to the people that are going to run, or you can run yourself. Trust me, if I could do it, anyone can. If you can act these changes in Kansas, anyone can. And just don't be complacent and think that it's not happening in your conservative town, because trust me, it is, and we need to take back our schools.
Amen. Yes. We need to boldly stand up. We need to pray. We need to vote. We need to stand. And because the next generation, as you said, Martin, is on the line here, and that affects the whole future of our country. So, Martin, you've been in the classroom. You've seen what teachers and what they go through, what administrators go through. You've spent a lot of time with students. So I know you have a heart for them. And so I'd like to ask that you would just close us in prayer and pray for them. And also for everyone watching, as to that God would show them what their role is.
Absolutely, yeah. Lord, we pray, God, we pray for forgiveness. As we've so often turned a blind eye to the lost world, we so often will ignore actions that you've called us to take. And God, we ask for courage like Amy has shown, to stand for the truth from your word. We recognize, Jesus, that you're the answer. God, that apart from you, we can accomplish nothing of worth. So God, give us strength to stand, to protect children, to lead in love and not hate. Although we often feel that righteous anger building up, God, help us to do what we know is right and to show love in action. And God, we ask that we'll do all of this in your name, and that we will live for your glory and not our own. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.